What would you do if your last lifeline was a rotting mountain cabin, only to realize the grandmother you thought died penniless left you a multi-million-dollar secret? This isn't a movie. This is the terrifying, twisted, true story of a homeless mother pushed to the absolute edge. The dashboard clock of the 2008 Honda Civic read 3014 a.m. Sarah Jenkins stared at the blurring green numbers, her breath pluming in the freezing November air. In the passenger seat, wrapped in 2 sleeping bags and wearing a winter coat, her 6-year-old son, Leo, was shivering in his sleep. This was their 4th month living in the car after the medical bills from her late husband's prolonged illness had drained their savings and a subsequent eviction notice had forced them onto the streets of Asheville, North Carolina. Sarah had hit rock bottom. She had spent the last 2 weeks parking behind a strip mall, surviving on discarded bakery items and the agonizingly slow churn of government assistance wait lists. Then the phone call came. It was an unknown number which Sarah usually ignored, assuming it was another debt collector. But desperation made her answer. On the other end was a man who introduced himself as Drew Pendleton, an estate attorney based in Boone. His voice was dry, devoid of any warmth, sounding like a man who read legal documents for sport. Miss Mardianabris Stufurpanid Jenkins, I am contacting you regarding the estate of your maternal grandmother, Beatrice Gable, Pendleton stated. She passed away 3 weeks ago. As her only living direct descendant besides her estranged son, you have been named the primary beneficiary of her property. Sarah was stunned. She hadn't seen grandmother Beatrice in over 15 years. Beatrice was an eccentric, notoriously impoverished woman who lived like a hermit in the Blue Ridge Mountains. Sarah's mother had cut ties with Beatrice decades ago, citing the old woman's creeping paranoia and absolute refusal to integrate into modern society. Property. Sarah choked out, the word feeling foreign on her cracked lips. My grandmother didn't have anything. She lived in a shack. It is a residential structure on 4 acres of land off Pine Ridge Trail, Pendleton corrected, devoid of emotion. The property is completely paid off. The title is clear. If you want the keys, you need to come to my office to sign the transfer papers. Otherwise, it defaults to the state to cover back taxes. 2 hours later, Sarah spent her last $12 on gas and drove the Civic up the winding mountain roads to Boone. Pendleton's office was suffocatingly warm, smelling of stale coffee and lemon polish. He slid a heavy iron key across his mahogany desk, along with a stack of papers. I must warn you, Miss Jenkins, Pendleton said, peering over his reading glasses. The property has been sitting vacant, and even when Beatrice was alive, it was substandard. But there is no central heating. The plumbing is antiquated, and the property taxes for the upcoming year will be your responsibility. You are inheriting a liability as much as an asset. Sarah didn't care. It was a roof. It was walls. It was a place where Leo wouldn't have to sleep sitting up. When they finally drove up the treacherous, deeply rutted dirt path of Pine Ridge Trail, Sarah's fragile hope shattered. The residential structure was a decaying, sagging wooden cabin that looked like it was slowly being swallowed by the surrounding forest. The porch roof was caving in, the windows were caked in decades of grime, and the yard was a graveyard of rusted farm equipment and overgrown briars. It didn't look like a sanctuary. It looked like a haunted house. As Sarah turned off the ignition, a pristine jet-black Ford F-150 pulled up behind them, blocking her car in the narrow driveway. A man stepped out. He wore a heavy wool coat, expensive leather boots, and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Sarah, it's been a long time, the man said. It took her a moment to recognize him through the haze of exhaustion. It was Thomas Gable, Beatrice's son, her uncle. The man who had abandoned the family moved to Charlotte and supposedly made a small fortune in commercial real estate. Uncle Thomas? Sarah stepped out of the car, instinctively shielding Leo behind her legs. I heard the old bat finally kicked it, and that bulldog lawyer gave you the deed, Thomas said, looking at the rotting cabin with an expression of deep disgust. Look at this place, Sarah. It's a teardown, a hazard. You can't put a kid in there. We don't have anywhere else to go, Sarah said defensively. Thomas sighed, pulling a sleek leather checkbook from his inner pocket. I know things have been hard for you. I want to help family. I'll buy the deed from you right now. $5,000. Cashier's check by tomorrow morning. You can get an apartment. Get back on your feet. Leave this pile of firewood to me. $5,000. To a woman with 1.43 in a checking account, it sounded like a lottery win. Sarah's heart pounded. She could take the money, drive back down the mountain, and sleep in a warm motel bed tonight. But as she looked at Thomas, a sharp instinct flared in her gut. Thomas was a ruthless businessman. He didn't do charity. He didn't care about family. He hadn't even attended her mother's funeral. So why was a wealthy commercial developer driving 3 hours into the mountains to offer $5,000 for a rotting cabin on land that was too remote to develop? No, Sarah said, the word slipping out before she could second-guess it. Thomas's fake smile instantly vanished, replaced by a cold, hard glare. Excuse me, I'm keeping it, Sarah said, her voice shaking but resolute. It's my house now. Please move your truck so we can unpack. Thomas stared at her, a muscle feathering in his jaw. For a terrifying second, Sarah thought he might physically attack her. Instead, he let out a low, humorless laugh. You're making a massive mistake, Sarah. This place is cursed. You weren't last week. He got back into his truck and threw it into reverse, tearing down the dirt road and leaving a cloud of dust in his wake. Sarah held Leo's hand tightly, staring at the decaying wooden door of her new home, terrified of what she had just done, and completely unaware of what was waiting inside. The first night in Beatrice's cabin was a waking nightmare. There was no electricity. The power company required a $300 deposit to turn the grid back on. Money Sarah simply didn't have. The only source of warmth was a massive, soot-stained stone fireplace in the center of the living room. Sarah burned broken branches from the yard and pieces of a rotting wooden chair she found on the porch to keep the fire going. She and Leo huddled together on a dusty, moth-eaten mattress they dragged from the back bedroom, listening to the wind howl through the gaps in the logs. When morning finally broke, filtering gray, dusty light through the filthy windows, Sarah got a clear look at her inheritance. It was worse than she thought. The cabin was a hoarder's paradise. Stacks of yellowed newspapers from the 1980s, boxes of rusted mason jars, and piles of broken, unidentifiable junk covered almost every inch of floor space. But what caught Sarah's attention wasn't the mess. It was the strange, almost obsessive modifications to the cabin. Heavy iron dead bolts, at least 3 per door, had been installed. The windows on the ground floor were boarded up from the inside with thick planks of oak, and everywhere she looked, tucked into jars or pinned to the walls, were little scraps of paper covered in Beatrice's frantic, spidery handwriting. Sarah pulled one from a dusty shelf. It read, "They don't know the depths. The foundation is the lie. Protect the ledger." "Mummy, I'm hungry," Leo whispered, pulling at her sleeve. Shaking off the eerie feeling, Sarah focused on survival. She had a few cans of soup in the car and a small camping stove. Over the next 3 days, while eating cold rations, Sarah threw herself into cleaning. She hauled out hundreds of pounds of garbage, burning the paper and dragging the heavy rusted junk to the tree line. The physical labor was exhausting, but it kept her mind off Thomas's ominous warning and the sheer terror of her situation. On the 4th afternoon, it started to rain, a torrential, freezing Appalachian downpour. Sarah was in the kitchen, aggressively scrubbing a layer of grime off the old porcelain sink, when she heard a strange, rhythmic clunk thud coming from the living room. She walked out to find Leo sitting on the floor near an incredibly heavy antique oak armoire that was pushed flush against the far wall. He had found a heavy glass marble in the dirt outside and was rolling it across the warped wooden floorboards. "Leo, careful, you'll lose that," Sarah warned. Right as she spoke, the marble rolled toward the armoire, hit a dip in the floor, and disappeared underneath the heavy furniture. But it didn't just stop. Sarah clearly heard a distinct drop and then a hollow clatter, as if the marble had fallen down a chute and bounced on something metallic far below. Sarah frowned. The cabin sat on a solid concrete slab. There was no basement. Pendleton, the lawyer, had explicitly stated the foundation was just a poured slab from the 1940s. Curiosity overtaking her exhaustion, Sarah grabbed a heavy iron fire poker. "Stand back, baby," she told Leo. She wedged the poker under the edge of the massive armoire and threw her entire body weight against it. With a deafening screech of wood on wood, the armoire shifted just enough to reveal the floor beneath it. The wood here wasn't dusty. It was clean, and upon closer inspection, the seams between the thick oak boards were perfectly straight, unlike the rest of the warped floor. Sarah knelt down, running her fingers over the wood. She found a tiny, almost invisible indentation. She wedged the tip of the fire poker into the gap and pried. A 2-foot section of the floor popped up seamlessly. It wasn't a floorboard, it was a masterfully crafted trapdoor. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. Underneath the door wasn't concrete. It was a deep, dark cavity smelling strongly of cedar and old paper. She grabbed her emergency flashlight from the car and shined the beam into the hole. At the bottom of the 3-foot drop lay 2 heavy, military-style canvas duffel bags, both covered in a thick layer of dust. Next to them was a rusted iron lockbox. Her hands trembling violently, Sarah reached down and grabbed the handle of the first canvas bag. She tried to pull it up with one hand, but it didn't budge. It was impossibly heavy. Ripping the floorboards, she used both hands and hauled the bag up, letting it crash onto the living room floor. The canvas was old and brittle. As it hit the wood, the fabric tore. Dull, metallic objects spilled out onto the floor. Sarah gasped, falling backward onto her hands. They were metal bars, about the size of thick brick, heavily tarnished and black with age. She picked one up. It weighed at least 10 pounds. She rubbed her thumb hard against the grime, revealing a bright, lustrous shine beneath. Stamped into the metal were the words, "You. Esson Welfolne, Esal Mantlash, Assay Office, 2999 fine silver." There were at least 30 bars in the first bag alone. At current market prices, Sarah was looking at hundreds of thousands of dollars sitting on her dirty floor. But as the initial shock washed over her, a deep, primal chill took its place. She remembered Thomas's desperate attempt to buy the cabin. She remembered Beatrice's paranoid notes. The foundation is the lie. Sarah reached back into the hole and pulled out the rusted iron lockbox. The latch was broken. Inside, she found no money, but something far more valuable and far more dangerous. It was a thick, leather-bound ledger dating back to 1934. The name embossed on the front was William Gable, her grandfather, a man she had been told died in a mining accident before she was born. She opened the ledger. It wasn't an accounting book. It was a detailed handwritten log of safe deposit box numbers, vault combinations, and names of prominent political figures across North Carolina and Virginia. And tucked into the back cover was a folded, hand-drawn map of the very mountain they were sitting on, with a red circle drawn a mile deep into the woods behind the cabin. Written across the map in bold red ink were the words, "If they find the silver, let them have it, and never let them find the cave." Suddenly, the silence of the cabin was shattered. Clash! A heavy rock smashed through the front window, showering glass across the living room floor. Leo screamed, diving onto the mattress. Sarah threw herself over her son, shielding him. Heart hammering against her ribs, Sarah looked up at the shattered window. Through the jagged glass, parked at the edge of the tree line with its headlights off, was a jet-black Ford F-150. Thomas hadn't left. He had been waiting. And now he knew she had found the floor. The sound of shattering glass was still echoing off the timber walls when the heavy, reinforced oak door rattled violently on its hinges. Someone was throwing their entire body weight against it. "Sarah, open the door." Thomas's voice roared over the sound of the torrential rain. It wasn't the smooth, polished voice of the wealthy Charlotte real estate developer anymore. It was guttural, frantic, and laced with absolute malice. "I know you found it. Open this door right now, or I swear to God I will tear this place apart with my bare hands." Sarah scrambled backward, her hands slick with a cold sweat, pulling Leo tightly against her chest. The little boy was trembling violently, his face buried in her winter coat. "Mommy, who is it?" Leo whimpered, his voice barely a squeak. "It's okay, baby. We're safe." "We're going to be perfectly safe," Sarah whispered, though her own heart felt like it was going to beat its way out of her ribcage. She looked at the heavy door. Beatrice's paranoia suddenly didn't look like madness. It looked like preparation. The 3 heavy iron deadbolts were fully engaged, holding the thick wood fast against Thomas's assault. The boarded-up windows on the ground floor, which had felt like a prison just hours ago, were now a fortress wall. Thomas slammed against the door again, the timber groaning, but the iron held firm. "You don't know what you're messing with, Sarah." Thomas screamed from the porch. "That silver doesn't belong to you. It's mine. It's my birthright." Sarah realized the cell service up here was practically non-existent, but she pulled her cheap, prepaid phone from her pocket anyway. No signal. Panic threatened to blind her, but the crushing weight of her reality over the past 4 months had forged a new kind of survival instinct. She couldn't freeze. If Thomas got inside, she had no doubt he would kill them both and bury them in the vast, unmarked wilderness of the Blue Ridge Mountains. She crawled back toward the open trapdoor. The heavy canvas bag, bleeding tarnished silver bars onto the dusty floorboards, was a fortune, but it was also a death sentence. Her eyes fell on the rusted iron lockbox and the leather-bound ledger beside it. Protect the ledger. Beatrice's frantic, spidery note flashed in her mind. If they find the silver, let them have it. And never let them find the cave. Sarah grabbed the ledger, her fingers tracing the deeply embossed name of her grandfather, William Gable. The cabin was dimly lit by the dying embers in the fireplace, so she clicked on her flashlight and opened the thick, yellowed pages. She had to know why a multi-millionaire was willing to commit murder over old silver. As she skimmed the precise architectural handwriting of her late grandfather, the terrifying truth began to assemble itself. This wasn't a family inheritance. It was a criminal empire. William Gable hadn't died in a mining accident. According to the ledger, dating from 1934 to 1952, William had been the primary launderer for a massive Appalachian bootlegging and racketeering syndicate. He used his position as a regional bank manager to wash millions of dollars in illicit cash. But William got greedy. Over the course of 18 years, he siphoned off a staggering percentage of the syndicate's wealth, converting it into untraceable silver bullion, bearer bonds, and rare gold coins. When the syndicate found out, they came for him. But before they could get to him, William was murdered. Sarah flipped to the last page, where a piece of loose paper fluttered out. It was a letter written by Beatrice, dated 10 years ago. "To whoever finds this, if it is my daughter, or her kin, forgive me. I lived in a prison of my own making to guard this secret. William was not killed by the mob. He was murdered by our own son." Thomas found William's stash when he was just 18. He confronted his father, and in a fit of rage and greed he struck him down. "I saw it. I helped bury the body to protect my boy, a sin that has rotted my soul." Thomas took the first batch of stolen money to build his real estate empire in Charlotte. He built a kingdom on blood, but he never found the master vault. He never found the cave. I locked him out. I hid the map. The silver under the floor is bait. If he comes back, let him take it. But the cave holds the evidence. The cave holds the ruin of Thomas Gable. A loud metallic clang snapped Sarah out of the ledger. Thomas had gone to his truck and returned with a heavy iron crowbar. He was furiously prying at the wooden planks covering the shattered front window. The old wood shrieked as the nails began to give way. He was going to get in. It was only a matter of minutes. "Leo, look at me," Sarah said, grabbing her son by the shoulders. She forced her voice to remain steady, projecting an absolute, unshakable calm. "We are going to play a game of hide and seek. But we have to be very quiet, okay?" Not a single sound. Leo nodded, tears streaming down his dirty cheeks. Sarah grabbed her son's hand, shoving the heavy ledger and the mat deep into the pockets of her oversized winter coat. She looked around the claustrophobic cabin. There was a back door in the kitchen, but it was chained shut with a rusted padlock. Beatrice had likely lost the key for decades ago, and Sarah remembered the strange layout of the bedroom. The old iron bed frame was bolted to the floor, positioned awkwardly away from the wall. Behind it was a large, heavy tapestry depicting a faded mountain landscape. Beatrice didn't decorate for aesthetics. Everything had a purpose. Sarah rushed into the bedroom, dragging Leo behind her. She tore the heavy tapestry down. Behind it, built seamlessly into the log wall, was a small, square wooden hatch fastened with a simple iron latch. It was an escape tunnel. Beatrice had spent 30 years waiting for Thomas to return, and she had built a way out. From the living room, a deafening crack echoed through the cabin. One of the thick window boards snapped in half. Thomas was halfway through. Sarah unlatched the hatch and shoved it open. It led to a narrow, enclosed wooden chute that sloped downward into absolute darkness, exiting somewhere beneath the cabin's raised rear foundations. "Go, Leo. Slide down." "I'm right behind you," she whispered urgently. Leo hesitated, terrified of the dark hole, but the sound of Thomas violently cursing and smashing the window again propelled him forward. He slid down the chute, disappearing into the pitch black. Sarah took one last look at the living room. She left the flashlight on, illuminating the torn canvas bag and the glittering silver bars sitting exposed on the floor. It was exactly what Beatrice had intended. Bait. She squeezed herself into the narrow chute and pulled the wooden hatch shut behind her, plunging them into total darkness just as the front window finally gave way with a catastrophic crash. The chute dropped Sarah and Leo into a cramped crawl space beneath the cabin, the air thick with damp earth and decay. Above them, footsteps thundered, then Thomas's manic laughter. He had found the silver. "Move," Sarah whispered, pulling Leo into the storm. Rain lashed down as they stumbled into the forest, cold soaking through instantly. Guided by a fragile map, they climbed toward a jagged formation marked the Devil's Jaw. Every step was agony mud, thorns and exhaustion dragging them down, but fear pushed them forward. At last they found it. Hidden behind dense brush, a narrow fissure opened into the mountain. Inside, the storm vanished, replaced by eerie silence. Sarah's flashlight revealed a vast cavern lined with military crates. She forced one open and froze. Stacks of pristine cash, gold coins, millions untouched for decades. This wasn't just a hiding place. It was the Empire's heart. Then Leo pointed to the desk. A rusted shovel, a sealed envelope, evidence preserved, deliberate. A trap waiting to be sprung. A slow clap echoed behind them. Thomas stepped from the shadows, soaked and smiling, a revolver in his hand. His eyes burned with greed as he took in the fortune. "Beautiful." "Ah," he whispered. Sarah shielded Leo. "Take it. Just let us go." Thomas laughed, raising the gun. Seen too much." A click of the hammer rang out. Sarah closed her eyes. "Duh! The Borley Five!" What exploded into the cave as officers stormed in, rifles trained. Red laser sights danced across Thomas's chest. Frozen, he dropped the gun. Moments later, he was on the ground, screaming as he was cuffed, his empire collapsing in seconds. From behind the officers, a familiar figure stepped forward. Drew Pendleton. The final piece of the trap had just closed. He walked over to Sarah, who had collapsed against the oak desk, sobbing uncontrollably as she held Leo. Pendleton knelt down, his usually dry, emotionless face softening into a look of profound relief and empathy. "Are you and the boy all right, Miss Jenkins?" he asked gently. How did you know? Sarah stammered, wiping the mud and tears from her face. Your grandmother wasn't just my client, Sarah. She was my friend, Pendleton explained softly, helping her to her feet. Beatrice knew Thomas was a monster. She knew that the moment she died, he would descend on this property to find the rest of the money. She explicitly instructed me to give you the deed, but to monitor the property day and night. She knew you had the courage to follow the clues, and she knew Thomas's greed would blind him to the trap. Pendleton looked at the envelope on the desk and the bloody shovel beside it. Sheriff Lawson, Pendleton called out to a tall, broad-shouldered man leading the arrest. I believe you'll find the murder weapon and the confession for the 1978 homicide of William Gable right here. Sheriff Lawson tipped his hat to Sarah. Mom, you're entirely safe now. We have him. As the deputies dragged a screaming, defeated Thomas out of the cave, Pendleton turned back to Sarah, a rare, genuine smile crossing his face. Miss Jenkins, Pendleton said, gesturing to the staggering mountain of military crates filled with gold and Depression-era currency. Since the original syndicate was dismantled in the 1960s and the statute of limitations on the original theft has expired by several decades, as the sole legal heir to the Gable estate, it appears you and young Leo will never have to worry about a place to sleep ever again. Not. 3 months later, the rusting, decaying cabin on Pine Ridge Trail was completely demolished. In its place, overlooking the breathtaking, sweeping valleys of the Blue Ridge Mountains, construction began on a beautiful, modern timber frame home. Sarah Jenkins stood on the newly poured foundation holding a steaming mug of coffee. She watched Leo running through the clear, sunlit yard, laughing as he chased a stray butterfly. They were no longer the desperate, homeless outcast sleeping in a freezing Honda Civic. They were survivors. They had faced the darkest, most terrifying skeletons of their family's past, and they had walked out into the light. Beatrice Gable had lived her entire life in fear, guarding a toxic secret. But in her final acts, she hadn't just given Sarah a house, she had given her justice, immense wealth, and most importantly, her life back. Did Sarah's terrifying journey and incredible discovery leave you breathless? Family secrets can be darker and deeper than we ever imagine, but justice always has a way of coming to light. If you loved this jaw-dropping true story of survival, betrayal, and hidden millions, please hit that like button, share this incredible tale with your friends, and subscribe for more amazing, real-life mysteries. What would you do if you found a vault? Comment below.